Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires, coming to you from Baltimore. In the Turkish elections on Sunday, with almost all of the ballots counted, the AKP has secured a majority by taking 50% of the votes. That is 325 of the 550-seat parliament. That is a far higher margin of victory than was expected. The leftist pro-Kurdish HDP surpassed the 10% threshold necessary to be in parliament, but its support dipped from the 13% it secured in June to just 10%, or just over 10%. Now joining me from Toronto to discuss all of this is Baris Karaagac. He's a lecturer in international development studies at Trent University in Ontario. He's also the editor of the book Accumulations, Crises and Struggles, Capital and Labor in Contemporary Capitalism. Baris, thank you so much for joining us on this Sunday Eve.
Hello, Sharmini. Thanks for having me.
So, Baris, what type of a majority did they get, and what does it all mean?
Well, it is a clear majority. This is a sad day, a tragic day for the progressive forces in Turkey. The AKP, after its failure, actually, in the June elections, well, this time was able to capture 49.4% of the popular vote, which gives the party 316 members of the parliament. This is an increase of 58 MPs and 8.5% since last June. This is, as I said, this is a clear majority. However, the AKP wanted at least 330 members this time, so that it could take a proposal to make constitutional changes to a referendum, which would be then decided, the outcome of which would be decided by the Turkish public. So right now, the AKP is 14 members short of such a majority. However, they will be able to form a majority government in parliament. And on the losing side of the election, we see two parties. The biggest losers, the biggest loser of this election has been the MHP, the ultra-nationalist/fascist party, which lost 39 of its 80 members. This refers to a decline in its popular vote by 4.4%. And the other loser has been the pro-Kurdish HDP party, which lost 21 of its 80 members. And this, again, corresponds to the fall by 2.4% in its vote percentage. The CHP, the Social Democratic Party, has increased its MPs by 2, while maintaining its voter percentage.
Baris, the escalation of violence in Turkey between the last election and now has been quite bad in terms of the attack on the peace rally in Ankara earlier this month, as well as late summer, when the students who had gathered at a student center were also attacked with a suicide bomber. And all of this creates a condition in a country where people feel threatened by such violence and insecure. And these are the very times they don't want to actually vote in a change in government. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in our previous talks, we talked about the importance of the escalation of violence and its possible consequences for the country. And then we also said that Erdogan and the AKP were playing a very dangerous game in the country and in the neighboring countries. But it seems that this escalation of violence has benefited the party. And the instability that has arisen out of this violence has significantly benefited the AKP. Actually, I would like to refer to a poll or 3 polls conducted by Ipsos since last May. In May 2015, when asked, 28% of the Turkish public indicated that the greatest problem Turkey was facing is unemployment. And particularly among the youth, unemployment has become a huge problem, particularly since the beginning of the Great Recession, 2007-2008. And 10% indicated that it was general economic problems, not enough money. And only 14% said it was the peace process, that process that had been going on between the Turkish state and the Kurdish movement to reach a peaceful conclusion regarding the Kurdish issue. But it was only 14% who saw this as the main issue in Turkish politics. And in July, we see the beginnings or the revival of the armed conflict, which had been dormant for about 2 years between the Turkish state and the armed Kurdish forces. And right after this, in August, we see that 47% of the population, when asked, said the biggest problem the country is facing is terror, or so-called terror, and the peace process. And only 12%, a fall from 28, indicated that it was unemployment. In September, a staggering percentage of 72 said it's the peace process and the so-called terror. So Erdogan and the AKP have been very successful at manipulating the Turkish public through, in this case, particularly chauvinistic nationalism. And this explains to a great extent why the ultra-nationalist / fascist MHP lost 4% of its votes to the AKP.
Now, Baris, what does this mean to the HDP, and where will they stand in terms of being able to influence any of the decisions being made in Parliament?
So I've right before our interview, I've listened to the speeches of the party members, including the co-chairs, co-leaders of the HDP. And Demirtas said, we will continue to fight against fascism. But he added, we will also continue to fight for peace. We will continue to demand peace. So HDP, I think now there's a clarity that as long as there's violence, as long as there's instability, this benefits the AKP. So HDP, I think, will continue to push for peace, or a peaceful solution, or peaceful conclusion to the Kurdish issue that has cost tens of thousands of lives in Turkey since 1984. But it also, this depends on what strategy President Erdogan and Prime Minister Davutoğlu will be following in the upcoming months and years, particularly vis-a-vis the HDP.
All right, Baris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Sharmini.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.